Hello everyone, I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax, and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. The guy who owed my boss money didn't pay up. Something else collected. I'm gonna keep this story brief. For legal reasons, I won't be able to disclose my line of work and who I work for, but let's just say I work in waste management, and my boss and co-workers are all a bunch of tough guys, real old school New Yorker types. If you guessed by now what I do for a living, then congratulations. What do you want, a reward or something, wise guy? Moving on. You see, although I don't really want to blow my own horn, I'm kind of a tough guy too. I'm pretty tall and have a wide frame, so my boss saw to it that I worked as muscle. I would do all sorts of jobs, such as driving important people in the company around and protecting them as well. But the job in which I truly shine the brightest is when my boss sends me to rough people up. I became so good at that particular sector that I'm always my boss's go-to when he needs a particular message sent. The usual agenda for me is shakedowns. My boss sends me over to people who've gotten a little too stubborn and often forget their places in this world. I usually serve as a firm reminder. These people all have some kind of beef with my boss, whether it be getting a little too cocky, stepping on the wrong toes, knowing too much, or owing my employers some moolah. The last one is the usual case, since there's lots of degenerate gamblers and junkies out there who've become too desperate for cash and had the genius idea of borrowing from us. I've seen my fair share of violence, not that I'm bragging about it. Just saying that broken bones and spilled blood is just common working hours to me. You get used to it, I suppose. Why am I telling you this? It's because in all my years doing all sorts of horrible shit to other human beings, there is one particular job, one fateful night that shook me to my very soul. I will tell you about that job now. One night I was sitting at home staring at my wall like some kind of lobotomite. Sometimes I'd space out and do this, so judge me, I don't care. Doing this kind of thing calms my mind. It has a nice therapeutic effect to it. My phone started ringing. It was my coworker. I picked it up and pressed it to my ear gently. "Yeah?" I said quietly as I continued to stare blankly at the wall. "Boss got a job for you. I'll send you the address. You know the rest," the aged, raspy voice said on the other end before hanging up. 2 pings on my notifications. I got the details of the job, such as a name and other info, and the pin on Google Maps. This was how jobs went these days. No more beating around the bush, straight to the point, just the way I like it. By this point, everyone already knew the tune and how to dance to it. I wouldn't have it any other way. I got ready for the job quickly. I put my jacket on, grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone, but most importantly, I grabbed my piece. It was a Glock 17. No fancy mods or anything. I never leave home without it. I slipped my piece into my pants waistband and unlocked my car, walking in. The nights I work, I preferred to keep the windows open to feel the night's cool breeze right into my face. The radio was always on, playing whatever the hell was on the stations. This night had a particularly cold, wet, and damp feel to it. It just rained and I could feel the low temperature of the weather all over the inside of the car. Wherever the app was taking me was way deep into the bad part of town, the part where even I hesitate to visit at times. Through the poorly lit streets where the lights are out and only my car's headlights are cutting through the pitch-black darkness, through the tight turns and twists, I finally arrived at the location. The house was medium-sized, looked old and run down. All the lights are off. Kinda looked like nobody was home too. But my guy told me someone's always home. I stepped out of the car and closed the door slowly. I locked it and walked up to the curb. You know that feeling you get when your entire body freezes up and every nerve in you is telling you to stop, to turn back, to not go through with it? I never felt that my entire life, but this particular night, that specific feeling hit me, and it hit me hard. I shook it off, being the stubborn bastard I am, and treaded on. It was my job and I had to do it. Today's client is James Morelli, but we call him Jimmy. The little rat always ran into money problems because he's an incredibly high-maintenance fuck with lots of vices and eccentric hobbies to fuel. He usually pays, but never on time. We have to rattle him a little bit each time to squeeze the cash out of him. This particular time, though, old Jimmy's been ducking our calls. He's been past due for 3 months already, and he owes my boss 50 grand. My boss doesn't take kindly to being ignored, especially if you owe him that much money. I walked up to the door and banged on it with force. "Jimmy, open up, it's Ka!" I yelled as I banged but got no answer. "Open the fuck up or I'm kicking this down," I yelled again as I grabbed the doorknob in an attempt to jiggle it. To my surprise, my hand turned the knob in one swift motion and pushed the door open with a noisy creaking noise. This was a little weird to me, considering Jimmy was a paranoid recluse who hid from even his closest friends and family, and who in their right mind would leave their front door unlocked in a neighborhood like this at this time of the night. I thought maybe somebody had broken in or something. I peered into the doorway and saw absolute darkness inside the house. Just pitch blackness with nothing in sight, just the outline of furniture and what else. I tried turning the lights on from the switch next to the door, but nothing happened. This definitely convinced me he wasn't home. Maybe he skipped town or something to run away from his debts. Regardless, I had to confirm. I walked over to my car and opened the passenger side door. I grabbed this long flashlight from under the seat and started walking back to the house. As I walked into the doorway, I turned my flashlight on and shined it throughout the living room. Place was a fucking mess. The furniture and wallpaper are all worn out, and there were trash and food wrappers scattered everywhere. It looked more like a spot where junkies gathered to do their business than somebody's actual home. I walked around to investigate, and some rats started skittering away when I stepped on some trash. It was the most repulsive environment I've ever been in all my years of living. Before I could explore around the house more, I heard some scratching in the basement area. It sounded like there was somebody down there. I drew my pistol and held it tightly as I shined my flashlight down the basement stairs. I knew for sure I might regret this, because that strange, hesitating feeling came back, and stronger this time. I walked down the basement stairs slowly, each step a creak from the rotting wood. Each breath of mine very audible from the dead silence that enveloped the house. I walked down until I reached the bottom. I shined my flashlight into the basement area. It was wider than I would have thought, and the scene horrified me. The basement smelled wrong. Not just the usual mildew and dust kind of wrong, but sweet, like spoiled fruit left out in the sun too long. My shoes stuck to the concrete with every step, each one making a wet, peeling sound. The light bulb overhead swung on its cord, throwing jittery shadows across the walls. That's when I saw it. The walls weren't walls anymore. They were covered in layers of meat. Human, maybe. Sheets of skin hung like old wallpaper, still glistening in spots. Nails, teeth, and scraps of hair were embedded in the pulpy mess, as if whoever did this had run out of space to throw their leftovers. In the middle of the room, Jimmy was on his knees. Naked, skin slick with blood that wasn't all his. He was muttering in a language that made my bones shiver while he carved symbols into his own skin with a broken shard of glass. A circle of similar symbols had been carved into the concrete, filled with something dark red and shiny that rippled like oil. Candles burned, but their flames bent toward the center, as if gravity worked different inside the circle. The red liquid surged upward like it was alive, forming hands first, then claws, Then a face that wasn't a face at all, just a gaping mouth lined with teeth that never stopped and eyes that always stared. The thing stepped out like it was peeling itself from another dimension. Jimmy didn't scream, didn't fight. He just tilted his head back, arms spread, and the thing bit down. Not like a shark, more like a wood chipper. His head went first, his body folding into that mouth in chunks, bones snapping like wet twigs and flesh, and muscle being torn like paper. I stood there watching it all unfold. I wasn't sure if I shat my pants already at that point, but I'm leaning on the thought that maybe I did. I was frozen in place as I watched that thing devour Jimmy whole, not even spitting the bones out after swallowing. My legs were trembling and my breath was stuck in my throat. Then, it looked at me. When it turned its head to face me, every nerve in my body started firing up, and by sheer instinct, I immediately drew my weapon and started firing at the creature. I dumped my entire 17-round mag right into the thing's face as I screamed the whole time, hoping that would have killed it, but unfortunately, it didn't. Its gaping mouth full of teeth curled up into a bit smile as its many eyes stared at me. It started laughing and laughing until it suddenly lunged at me, grabbing my leg. I let out a yelp as it grabbed me, and I struggled to get loose from its grip. I tried to pull my leg out to no avail. I looked around for anything that could help me and found a hatchet leaned on the basement stairs. I swiftly grabbed the hatchet and chopped at the creature's limb with primal force. I swung over and over and over until the limb came off entirely, and the creature screamed in a distorted voice out of pain. I ran up the basement stairs and fumbled all around the house as that thing chased me. I tripped on things and struggled through the trash in the dark, but I managed to locate the front door and the moonlight peering into the house from it. I was able to run directly for it before the creature could grab me in the darkness, and I was able to jump into my car after throwing the door open. I quickly drove away, never looking back at that god-forsaken fucking house. The next day after that shit show, I told my boss everything that happened in complete sincerity, and he never called me crazy or made fun of me. He looked me dead in the eyes and told me with a straight face, Jimmy owed money to something else, simple as that, as he quickly resumed back to his paperwork. I've never been a religious man, but these days I've been going to church every Sunday and praying to the Lord. I sleep with a Bible under my pillow and I pray every night before going to bed, rosary and all. Sometimes I think of gathering some of my co-workers and going back to that house with lots of guns, maybe set that fucking place on fire and shoot whatever comes out. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. Overprotective. When I was in middle school, I didn't have a lot of friends. It didn't make me sad, though, lonely, but not sad. I would walk home every day reading a book, and I was content. My walk home was short. I had already been doing it for 2 years at that point, and I was a teenager. A whole 13 years old, and obviously I thought I knew everything. I was passing by the park one day, engrossed in a story about a magical world behind a wardrobe, when I wanted to stop to finish the section I was reading. I crossed into the park instead of around it and plopped down on a bench. "Oh, look, Abby finally made a friend and they're travel-sized," a girl's voice squealed. I looked up and Darcy, the most popular girl in my school, was standing with her group of friends laughing at me. "How's the book, Flabby? Maybe you'll find a different book to be your boyfriend," she continued, earning a high five from the girl on her right. My eyes burned as I felt stares on me, but I just put the book up to cover my face and tried my best to block them out. After about 5 minutes of me ignoring them, they left. As I read pages and pages, the sounds and squeals from the playground slowly went away. I hardly noticed, though. I was actually glad for the quiet. "Are you lost?" a voice asked me. I dropped my book, startled, before looking up to see a boy standing before me. I had never seen him before, but he seemed a little older than me. I was sure we probably went to the same school, though. Maybe he was on the football team and I didn't go to those games. I was still staring as he adjusted his baseball bag to his other shoulder. "No, I'm not lost. I'm just taking a break. I live over there," I said, gesturing in the general direction of my house. The boy followed my hand and nodded. "It's pretty dark. You should go home," he said softly. I looked at the sky and gasped. The streetlights were on. How long had I been lost in the story? "What time is it?" I asked. "It's almost 8, the boy responded. "Oh no, you're right. I'm going to be in trouble," I said quickly, standing up and putting my things away. "Do you want me to walk you?" the boy had asked. "Oh no. It's just my brother home right now. He goes to the high school. He will be upset if he sees me with a boy, even if he's just a friend. Thank you, though. What's your name?" I asked, standing up to meet his gaze. "Ethan," he replied. "Nice to meet you, Ethan. I'm Abby. See you," I said, turning around to dash to my house. "Your brother seems annoying," Ethan called after me. "Not annoying, just overprotective," I called back. As I was walking across the grass to the sidewalk, I saw Darcy across the field. She was sitting on a bench, hunched over a cell phone. She looked like she had changed out of her clothes. She wore that day and was wearing something my brother's girlfriend would likely wear. A light blue strapless dress that looked super short. I debated calling out to her, asking if she needed something, but I thought better of it and continued home. Lucky for me, that night I made it home before my brother got home from being with his friends, but not by much. The next morning, my mom was on the phone with our neighbor. "Oh, how awful, Susan. It just isn't safe anywhere." She had sighed into the phone. I furrowed my brows together and watched her as I shoveled Lucky Charms into my mouth. Okay, yes, keep me posted," my mom said, and then hung up. "Mom?" I asked. She stared at the phone on the wall for a moment before she crossed to me and sat at the kitchen table. She reached out and held my hand. "Sweetie, do you know a Darcy in your grade?" she asked gently. I nodded. "She's popular, so we aren't friends." "But I know her. Why?" I responded. "Darcy didn't come home last night. Her parents are calling around. They said she always stops at the park before coming home. Did you see her there yesterday when you passed it?" my mother pressed. I mumbled. How could I admit that I did see Darcy there and not get in trouble for being there so late? Should I tell her about Ethan and be in trouble for 2 things? I really didn't want my parents to be mad at me. I saw her there after school. I stopped there and read for a little bit. When I left, she was still there, I said, playing with the drawstrings on my jacket. My mom watched me, nodding. "And what time was that?" she asked. School was out at 3:30, so I think 4, I mumbled. It wasn't a total lie. My mom nodded again. "Okay, thank you, baby. We are just trying to make a timeline of where she was. If you hear anything at school, make sure to tell your teacher or me," she said seriously, before kissing me on the head and walking into the living room. I exhaled a long breath. Right before I left, my mom came back in with a new cell phone for me. "Wow, is this mine?" I asked excitedly. "Yes, but it's just for emergencies. You have my number, Dad's and your brother's. There's also a tracker on it. I've been saving it for your birthday, but you're getting it now," she told me, shifting her eyes away. I still hugged her and said thank you, and she hugged me back tightly. "I hope Darcy is at school." Darcy wasn't there. There was an assembly held to talk about her and to ask that if anyone knew anything to please come forward. My heart was beating so fast I was convinced someone else could hear it. After school, I took the same walk through the park. "Abby, hey!" a voice called behind me. I turned and saw Ethan jogging up to meet me. "Ethan, hey," I said shyly. The only boys I had ever talked to were related to me. I wasn't sure how to do this. Hey, so how much trouble did you get in? He asked. Oh, none actually. My brother was at a play at the high school, so I made it home before he did, I explained. Oh, wow, lucky. I get in trouble if I'm even 5 minutes late, he said, laughing. Oh, right. Well, did you get in trouble last night for being in the park so late? I asked. He shook his head. No, I was at baseball practice and was walking home when I saw you. They knew about that, he told me. Did you see a girl in the park last night? I asked him. He looked at me confused. I saw you, if that's what you mean, he responded. No, besides me. There's a girl in our class who went missing, and I think I saw her here last night, and now she's gone, I explained. Ethan nodded and looked around the park. I don't remember seeing anyone else, but I will ask around. What is her name? He asked. Darcy, she has blonde hair, and I think she was wearing blue last night, I told him. Yeah, I'll ask around, he said, smiling at me. I was squinting at him. I didn't think he went to my school. What school do you go to? I asked. I go to the high school. I'm a freshman this year. Are you in middle school? He asked. I nodded. 7th grade, I told him. He nodded and smiled. Do you want me to walk you home? He asked. Sure, I responded. After Darcy went missing, I was anxious about walking home alone. We walked the short distance to my house, laughing and talking. Now that I felt more relaxed, I noticed just how cute Ethan was. He was cute in a grown-up way, in a way where I felt very self-conscious around him. He seemed to like me, though, even though I was weird, and he hugged me before I disappeared into my house. He smelled like Axe body spray and Irish Spring. I'm never washing this shirt again, I whispered. A week went by, and no news about Darcy. Ethan walked me home every day. He said I needed someone looking out for me, and I felt like a princess with her knight accompanying her. He would walk me to the house next door, reminded me about my brother not seeing us, and waited for me to make it into my house. He even gave me his phone number and would text me good night every night. My brother Derek had noticed my shift in mood. What are you smiling about, dork? He asked with chips in his mouth. Ethan had just sent what I think was a flirty message. 2 years is nothing. When I'm 30, you'll be 28, and by that point we might be married. I will build you your own library in our house. OMG. Nothing, I said, smiling. Derek shrugged and returned to his own phone. Do you know an Ethan? I asked him. Ethan what? He responded, not looking up from his phone. Oh, I don't know his last name, but he's on the baseball team. He's tall and has light brown hair and freckles. I gushed. Derek shook his head, still engulfed in his social media. There's not an Ethan on baseball, he responded. But yes, he is. He has a baseball bag, I argued. Derek's head shoots up. Have you talked to this guy? Why are you talking to a guy in high school anyways? He demanded. Uh-oh. I'm not. I just saw him at the park and talked to him for a second. He just seemed nice, that's all, I said quickly. Derek looked at me for a long moment and shook his head. Don't talk to high school guys, Abs. They only want one thing, okay? He asked. I nodded. He turned back to his phone and I got up to go to my room. My heart was thumping. That was too close. As I crossed behind Derek, I saw he was searching for an Ethan on social media. I continued texting Ethan in my room. I was just starting to get ready for bed when his name popped up on a call. Oh my God, I whisper shouted. I took a few deep breaths before answering the call. Hello? I asked. Hey, gorgeous. His smooth voice responded. I could feel myself physically swooning. I laughed like a maniac, and then took another deep breath. What are you up to? I asked. I am just finishing up at practice, and I was thinking, maybe we should meet up, he responded. Like, Right now? I asked. He laughed softly. Yeah, we never get time really alone when I walk you home, he explained. My heart flipped. Well, do we need to be alone? I asked, laughing awkwardly. Well, if I want to feel like I can kiss you without your brother seeing, he chuckled. Double flip. Oh, well. I don't know about tonight. Derek is downstairs and he will see me if I leave, I stammered. Go out your window, Ethan offered. I looked at my window with the unicorn curtains hung over them. I don't know, I mumbled. Well, how can you be my girlfriend if you won't come and see me? Ethan asked. Girlfriend. Triple flip. Okay, I'll come, but just for a little bit, I said. I'll meet you at the park. See you soon, Ethan said cheerfully. When we hung up, I jumped in a circle in my room. He called me his girlfriend and he wanted to give me my first kiss. I couldn't believe I wasn't just floating off the ground. I quickly changed into a cuter outfit and glossed up with a cherry lip smackers. Luckily, my window was very easy to get out of. Derek wouldn't check on me, but just in case he did, I turned the light off and shoved some pillows in my bed. I didn't realize how fast I was walking and I made it to the park in record time. Ethan was waiting for me on a bench. He was texting on his phone when I walked up, but smiled when he saw me and slid his phone back into his pocket. Hey, he said softly, wrapping me in a hug. I giggled and hugged him back. It really was a perfect night. The moon was large in the sky, and the stars were twinkling like they were encouraging us. Should we sit? I asked, gesturing to the bench. Ethan shook his head. Nah, come on, I have a better idea, he said, taking my hand and leading me across the grass to the small parking lot. Where are we going? I asked. I have my mom's car tonight. I thought we could drive around, maybe go get food, maybe something else, he said, winking at me. Ethan, I don't know. You're only 15, you don't have a license, I protested. He waved me off. I drive all the time, I promise I'm great, he said just as we made it to the dark red sedan. He opened my door for me. Milady, he said, bowing. I looked at the back seat through the window. It was empty except for a blue shirt laying on the seat. Where is your baseball stuff? I asked. He blinked slowly and looked at me. What? He asked. Your baseball stuff? Wouldn't you have it with you if you just left practice? I asked, tilting my head. Oh, I must have left it there in the locker room. My bad, he responded. I was quiet for a few moments and I could feel this weird feeling creeping up my stomach. I really shouldn't. Can we just take a walk around the park? I asked. Don't be silly, we won't be gone long. Just get in the car, he said, smiling his familiar smile. I mumbled, looking over my shoulder at my neighborhood. I don't think so, Ethan. I'm going to go home, maybe another time, I offered. I didn't want him to be mad at me, but I didn't want to be gone so long that Derek noticed. Abby, Ethan said, laughing softly. I stay still. Get in the car, please, he said, but it was different this time. He sounded angry. Just then my phone had begun to ring. When I pulled it out, Derek's name flashed on the screen. Crap, I whispered. It's Derek. I think he knows I left. I really have to go. Just get in the car, I'll drive you home, Ethan said quickly like he was panicking. My phone rings again. Why do you want me to get in your car so badly, I asked. Just please, get in, Ethan demanded. No, I yelled. Damn it, Darcy, get in the car, Ethan yelled back. I froze. Once Ethan realized what he said, his eyes widened. Oh my God, I whispered. The rest of Ethan's clever mask shattered, and he lunged for me. I was able to dive out of the way, landing in the grass before pushing myself up to my feet as I began to run. I could feel Ethan right behind me, yelling, and his hands just narrowly missing me. I saw red and blue lights flashing towards the park. Help! I yelled, waving my arms. Shut up! Ethan screamed. I crossed the grassy field as the police cars pulled around the park. "Help me, please!" I screamed. "No!" Ethan yelled. The police were still far, but I could see them start to get out of their cars. I ran as fast as I could, sobbing and trying to go even faster. "Hey!" a voice bellowed to the side of us. Ethan and I both turned our heads as a dark figure tackled Ethan to the ground at full speed. It was still so dark I saw two figures rolling around the grass, not stopping until a loud crack sounded and Ethan screamed in pain. The police were around us then as the dark figure stood and turned to me. "Derek," I sobbed. He rushed to me and enveloped me in a hug. I cried into him while the police handcuffed Ethan, yanking him to his feet as he screamed and complained about his apparently broken wrist. "How did you know where I was?" I asked. Derek took out his phone and pointed to the tracking app my mom had installed on our phones. The one time I've ever been grateful for my mom's overprotectiveness. "You were right," I said, putting my face in my hands. "High school boys are awful." Derek was quiet, so I uncovered my eyes and peered at him. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it immediately as a police officer approached us. "Hey kids, are you okay, both of you?" she asked. Derek and I nodded. "Okay, great. Your parents are on the way, but we wanted to ask you some questions." "Abby, is it?" she asked. I nodded. "I didn't know he was mean. I just met him recently, and I like the idea of dating a high schooler. I know that sounds stupid," I mumble. The officer smiles at me sympathetically. "Sweetie, Ethan isn't in high school," she told me. "What?" I asked as I heard Derek take a deep breath behind me. "Ethan isn't even his real name, and he's 25. I know he looks young, but..." She looked over her shoulder to where Ethan was being hauled into a cop car. "Then why would he say he was?" I asked, genuinely confused. "We think he was taking girls your age. We are going to check him out, see where he lives." "But you had a classmate named Darcy go missing recently, correct?" she continued. I nodded. "Did he say anything about her?" she asked. "He called me her name on accident," I replied. The officer nodded again and radioed something to someone else while stepping away. Just then my parents came running across the street. My mom was crying and my dad looked like he was going to tackle someone. Derek happily informed him that he already took care of that part. We got cleared to go home, and as we crossed the street I met eyes with Ethan as he pulled away, in the police car. I looked away quickly as Derek put his arm around me and flipped the car off. I wasn't in trouble, but Sorry, Patrick sure was. He retained his innocence up until trial. But the bodies the police found in his backyard turned his arguments into silence. They speculated he had taken over a dozen girls, but only 5 were discovered. Unfortunately, Darcy was never found. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into Story 3. Something ancient still lives in the most uninhabitable parts of America's deserts. The Chihuahuan Desert is as inhospitable as it is vast. I drove through my last small town an hour or two before and hadn't passed a car in 30 minutes. The only noises accompanying me on my journey was the hum of my vintage Cadillac I'd just picked up in San Antonio and the occasional squawk of a turkey vulture overhead. The radio was busted, not that I cared all that much. I preferred to be alone with my thoughts, especially when driving. The dust bites like a rattlesnake out here, and seeing it creep into the car's dark paint job almost brought a tear to my eye. I can remember that day clearly. The sun was high in a cloudless sky and beating down relentlessly on everything below it. Beads of sweat dripped like a busted faucet down my brow, forcing me to squint. The barely paved road was desolate, and by this point in the day, it felt like I hadn't seen another car in hours. Or anything, for that matter. Even the cacti had petered out. Either side of me lay a landscape of orange and beige, dotted with dying shrubs and otherworldly rock formations. Very little called the cracked soil home. Scorpions, snakes, and insects bordering on alien. Buzzards fed on the hardiest of mammals who tried to stick it out. Whether it was a rabbit, a wolf, or a human being, they'd all be reduced to a scattering of bleach-white bones. Still, this patch of land had a road running through it for a reason which I was reminded of when I saw a gas station up ahead. It began as a pinprick on the horizon, enlarging as I drew nearer. There was a certain haze to the building, an illusion of the heat. I left a trail of dust in my wave as I pulled into the mirage. Parking by the pumps, which had a no gas sign hanging about them, I swung my car door open and let my boots hit the sand. The heat struck immediately. It was oppressive and blistering, but bearable if you'd been raised in it. I straightened my spine with a crack and looked around. The building looked derelict. The windows covered in faded advertisements were cracked and stained and set into crumbling masonry. From further up the road, I saw that a small home had been tacked on behind the gas station. Surrounding the structure was a collection of a dozen or so cars, rusted and ruined. Accompanying them was discarded furniture, anything from a rotting wooden closet to an old washing machine. The place was a dump, and the makeshift animal bone decor dangling from every overhang only made it more repulsive. Then again, it wasn't like I had a choice of where to stop off. I gritted my teeth, passed under the bison skull above the entrance, and stepped inside. The counter was unmanned and the store was barren. I walked in and made my way between the shelves, each stacked with a handful of goods. A dozen cans of beans here, a few bottles of sauce there. An unplugged freezer was nestled in the far corner. It had an awful smell wafting from it. There was a rack to my right with a few unrecognizable brands of candy stocked on it. Looking closely, I realized the small black stains that covered the colorful packaging was in fact a colony of ants. I glanced down the aisle, taking it all in. My grandmother's pantry was more well-stocked than this place, and she's dead. "What can I do you for?" called a warm voice from behind me. I whirled around. There was a man standing behind the counter, his hands resting on the dusty wooden top. His skin was a sickly pale, punctuated by a deathly blue hue. He wore a yellowing vest, stained with oil and sweat. As I approached the store's dank checkout, I saw that he was wearing a tattered pair of jeans. He had a faded feed cap covering scraggly strands of gray hair. His face, like the rest of him, had been through the ringer. His eyes alternated between beady and bulging. His fat, hawkish nose was bent into the shape of a question mark, and he had fewer teeth than I could count on my fingers. He seemed to be proud of what blackened teeth he had left, though, as he grinned hideously. "I was wondering if you had a map I could take a look at," I said. "A map, huh?" Sure, he replied. "What kind? State map? Road map?" "Just one of the local area, please," I asked. Suddenly he yelled, shocking me into taking a step back. "Plum, bring me the small map," shouted the man behind the counter. There was no response. For a second, we just looked at each other in silence. "The name's Hank, by the way," said the man as he wiped his nose on his wrist before holding out his hand to shake mine. I returned the gesture reluctantly and told him my name. Not my real one, of course, but it was the polite thing to do. It was followed with more silence as I awkwardly stood in front of him, trying to look anywhere but the growth under his eyelid. I felt a craving starting to build up in me and saw the rack of gum by the counter. Impressively, it was ant-free. I grabbed a packet of apple-flavored chewing gum and slid it across to Hank. "I'll take this too," I said. Hank nodded. "That'll be..." He paused for a long second before saying, as if it was a question, 5 cents. 5 cents? I parroted, surprised. Sorry, said Hank when he saw my reaction. "I meant 45 cents? I took out a crumpled dollar bill and handed it to him. He took it from me and folded it into his antique register, then plucked out the right change, which he deposited into my palm. As I put the gum in the back pocket of my levies, the old door to our left creaked open. A girl shyly walked in who couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. She had a white dress on, the hem covered in mud and sand. Her skin was a perfect shade of white, and her hair wasn't far behind. She glanced at me with raw pink eyes as she handed a map to Hank. "Thank you, Plum," he said, putting her shoulder. She turned and wandered back through the door. Hank unfurled the map, spreading it out in front of us. It was basic, showing a small section of highways and byways that cut through the surrounding desert. Hank's cruciform pendant dinked against the counter as he leaned, hunchback flared over it. He poked a finger at me as he slumped forward. "Why are you heading by here anyhow?" he asked gruffly. "We don't get much folks a-coming through nowadays." "Business," I replied. When Hank realized that was all he was getting in the way of an answer, he relented and leaned back. I thanked him dryly and inspected the map closely. The first thing I noticed was a small red line drawn through one of the roads. In the far corner, a particularly desolate stretch of land was marked by a red pen scrawled in the shape of an X. I pressed my finger down on this spot of the map and looked at Hank. "What's that about?" I asked him in earnest. Suddenly and furiously, he pounded his meaty fist down on the counter, causing the various jars and knickknacks laying across it to shake. Spittle flew from the corner of his cracked lips as he spoke. "Don't you fucking think about it, you Yankee fuck," roared the inbred. I took a cautious step back. "Hey man, I was just asking," I yelled back. What followed was a quick and intense staring contest. Hank suddenly moved, as if he was about to come out from behind the counter. As soon as he did, I got out of there, kicking the decrepit front door open and almost off its rusted hinges. I trudged out, stirring up dust as I speed-walked back to my car. The little girl, Plum, was sitting on the ground across the gas pumps. An old umbrella was stabbed into the dirt in front of her, masking her in shade. She looked away from the dead rattlesnake she was playing with and watched me as I slammed the driver's side door shut. I pulled out as Hank walked hurriedly towards me. I began down the road and saw that he'd stopped in the middle of the tarmac behind me, a small cloud of sand swirling around him. "Careful, stranger," he screamed as I drove off. "It's egg-frying hot out there." I'm not fond of rural America. Sure, there's the occasional quaint mom-and-pop shop that offers a free slice of apple pie with every purchase, but they felt few and far between. It's a shame, I can remember thinking as I drove, that my job often led me out to the boondocks. Not that the cities were much better, but they never claimed otherwise. I've never heard of someone being shocked by a bad encounter in a place like Spartanburg, but out here a certain plastic kindness is expected. Rarely from my personal experiences is it ever found. I was going to the Red X, an area where anyone passing through is told expressly not to go felt perfect, and I had commit Hank's map to memory. Once I was far enough away from that gas station, and sure he wasn't following me in the old pickup I saw parked next to the building, I pulled up on the side of the road. I opened my glove compartment and took out my own folded road map of that state. I traced the marked roads, finding my location and working out my position in relation to Hank's small scope map. I found the spots on a few roads that I assumed were only known and used locally and were just dirt tracks by any other name. Because of this, I reasoned, they didn't make the cut for any official land survey. After some pondering and pen-chewing, I felt pretty certain that I'd located the supposed forbidden area and marked it in myself. I put the map down on the passenger seat and started to drive. Over the next few hours, I passed 2 cars. Both times I held my breath as they went by, waiting for them to stop and for Hank's entire extended and heavily armed family to pile out. That didn't happen, obviously, and I was left alive long enough to enjoy the wonderful scenery. The further I went, the more the full, desolate landscape became populated with strange and awesome rock formations. They stood at odd angles, like the furniture arrangement of some biblical giant. Some sprawled like massive petrified fungi. Others stood slender and small near the roadside, tricking my tired mind into imagining a desperate hitchhiker. As the sun dipped below the orange horizon and a deep purple overtook the sky, these stationary travelers became more frequent. Some were geological features, others were cacti, but a few I could have sworn were neither. Without GPS or really any road signs to work off, my journey consisted mostly of guesswork. Still, I was relatively certain I was in the right spot as I veered off the barely paved road and into the desert, praying to God to protect my bumper. My headlights pervasively revealed my surroundings as I drove further, crushing small shrubs beneath my wheels. Finally, I decided I was secluded enough. I braked, parking my car next to a small clearing of earth with little vegetation. I let the car run, lighting up the area. I swung the door open and stood up for the first time in hours. My back cracked in places I never imagined could as I stretched. After limbering, I opened the back door and leaned in. Retrieving the shovel laid out under the seat, slammed the door shut again and walked to the back of the car. I popped the trunk and grimaced. The body had started to smell. It was to be expected, I can remember thinking, since it had hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit on the journey out here. With that in mind, I was surprised that she hadn't been baked in that small metal compartment. The body was a woman in her 40s, I reckoned, with dyed blonde hair and a poor dress sense. I wasn't sure why she was killed or why they needed her to disappear so fast, but then again, I never was. Not that it mattered. I grabbed her, making sure to lift with my legs as I heaved the encumbering weight from its resting place. I set it down in the dust with a puff of my chest and got to digging her grave. I'd been blessed with a patch of land free of hard-packed caliche. Instead, it was mostly loose topsoil and sand. This wasn't without an extra magnitude of difficulty, though. The cold night winds of the desert blew low into the slowly deepening hole. On top of this, loose sediment collapsed inwards every few minutes. The whole ordeal felt like taking a step forward and two back. Gradually, the hole began to widen. Soon it was almost 3 feet deep. I thanked God for not placing a layer of volcanic rock right beneath where I stood during his creation of the earth. Once it was at an acceptable depth, I set the shovel down and began to drag the corpse toward it. It was cold, and stupidly I hadn't brought a jacket with me. Doing so felt needless considering the midday weather. Shivering, I dumped the body unceremoniously in the small pit. Still in the fetal position, I started to cover it up with the dry dirt piled around the opening. Eventually, there was no evidence of her existence other than a small bump in the ground. Satisfied, I threw my trusty shovel in the trunk, not wanting to get soil all over the leather seats. I closed and locked it and walked around to the front of the car. I took a packet of cigarettes and a lighter from the glove compartment and lit one up. I started to amble around the car as I smoked. It really was a lovely part of the country. The moon was high in the sky now, and the rock formations were left as nothing but a silhouette, all depth and color lost. While visually the beauty had been dampened, I could clearly hear the vibrance of my surroundings. Coyotes howling, owls shrieking, and masses of insects buzzing singularly. All of this was tied together by the dull moan of the wind, swirling up clouds of fine shale around me as I walked. I met it with my own clouds of tobacco smoke, but it was no contest. Getting lost in the strange elegance of the southwestern United States was as easy as getting lost there physically. I suddenly became conscious of my absent-minded wandering. I dropped my cigarette and killed it under my boot heel. The car was about 30 yards away, easily visible thanks to the blinding headlamps. As I started to walk towards it, a sudden stillness grasped the area. Listening out, I could hear, well, nothing, apart from the low hum of the engine. Frowning, I kept making my way towards the car. I reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and collapsed inside with a sigh. I pinched the bridge of my nose. The beginnings of a migraine were starting to take hold. I exhaled again as I started to drive, the uneven ground making for a bumpy ride. I hadn't even reached the road when I saw it. Looking in my wing mirror, I saw someone standing over the grave. The figure was a featureless silhouette made visible by the moonlight. I stopped the car and got out, squinting to see it better. Was it a mirage? A trick of the dim light? I could make out a head and arms hanging just apart from the torso. I was sure it was right where I had buried the body. I took a flashlight from the glove compartment, flicked the beam on high, and began to make my way toward the figure. Bright light wasn't kind to the foliage, which appeared as sickly green-gray weeds. I brushed past them as the figure came more in view. I strained my eyes to glean more detail until suddenly it disappeared. Like a tower being demolished, its humanoid form pancaked downwards and became the night. "Hey, hey!" I shouted, unnerved. I picked up my pace until I was at the spot. I threw the light around me, but saw nothing other than the small patch of upheaved earth. Once I was sure no desert-dwelling hick had stumbled onto the burial site, I turned, constantly glancing over my shoulder, and walked back to the car. At this point, it was freezing. I could see my breath swirl in the air around me. The difference in temperature between midday and midnight was astounding. I started to wonder if it was a punishment, the fact that my boss gave me a car with busted air conditioning for this job. I chuckled to myself, sending another cloud of freezing vapor out around me. My flashlight's beam finally cast itself over the Cadillac. There was someone sitting in the back seat. I froze, this time from fear rather than the harsh weather. I stood still just a few feet away from the back of the trunk. The back of the person's head looked bleached and wrinkled. I realized the red band of fabric around it was a hat. Suddenly, the thought that it was Hank struck me. Fear mixed with anger, and I clutched the flashlight like a dagger, ready to use it as a weapon. I charged and swung open the back door. The inside was empty. I cursed and threw my light down onto the padded seats. I slammed the door shut and walked around the side, taking my place behind the wheel. I hit the gas and started barreling through the landscape, the car's suspension not easing the brutal terrain. I started to climb the small incline that led to the road. Finally, I swerved onto the paved path. Abruptly, the car stalled. Conked out, it moved slowly like a lame deer down the road. Suddenly, as I was trying to get the damn thing going again, a figure appeared in the glow of my headlights. My car came to a final halt within the figure's touching distance. This time, I could clearly make him out. He was a man, tall and emaciated. His skin had been leathered by the harsh sun, and his hair was a tangled rope-like mess. The face of a coyote, skinned from the skull of the creature, dangled between the man's legs, acting as a loincloth. Other than that, and the crown of dried desert flowers across his brow, he was naked. A red dye had been applied to the upper part of his face, seeping from his hairline to down below his dark eyes, where only total blackness occupied. With an animalistic clamor, the man leapt from the asphalt and onto the hood. The car's engine gasped to life as the man positioned himself on the roof, taking a slender flint dagger from his loin strap and stabbing it into the windscreen. My crack spread like scary fingers reaching, and I knew a second attack would cave it in. I hit the gas for a second time and my car began to surge down the road. There was a dull thud and I saw in my wing mirror that the man had rolled off. I sighed, and vowing to never enter this state again, I drove off. If I had to guess, I'd say around 5 minutes passed and I was doing 60 or so. That's when I heard it. A low pattering noise, almost drowned by the sound of the engine. It grew louder, and before I glanced in the mirror to confirm my position, I saw him. He was keeping pace with the car, running up to the driver's side window. I screamed and swerved the car, trying to knock him down. He simply dropped back a few yards before catching up again. It was an unnatural sprinting that put any athlete to shame, mixed with a predator's dash every time he dropped to all fours. Whenever I would hazard a glance back, he seemed to be in another stage of monstrous transmutation. His skin shifted and moved like a disturbed wasp next was trapped beneath it. As his bones cracked and reformed, he began to lag behind. By the time it began to howl and scream with a dozen voices of man and beast, it was lost in the darkness behind me. I gripped the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me alive and kept driving. I had stopped looking behind me at this point, my vision locked onto the road in front of me. My panic started to ease off after a while of not hearing or seeing the thing. I realized how fast I was going and slowed down. A body rolled towards me. I slammed the brakes, but not before going over it with a crunch. I let out a strained gasp of defeat. Nursing my neck from the whiplash of the sudden halt, I put the car in reverse. Going over the body a second time, I moved back until it was laid bare in the light of the headlamp's beams. My suspicion was coldly confirmed. It was the body I had buried an hour before. I put my head in my hands, wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in hell. It sure had the landscape to match. I looked up and saw that the body was still there. It was definitely the same person. Although she now had an extra gloss of blood covering her, I could make out the mom jeans and luminous pink top. I sat still, gripping the wheel for some time, paralyzed by both fear and choice. I knew if I left her there, she'd be found by the next passers-by. I couldn't bear thinking about what my boss would do to me if that body's face was suddenly on every news broadcast across the state. Even though I hadn't seen that thing that had been tailing me in almost an hour, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness. All of my dread mixed together in my mind, clouding it and stopping me from thinking of the real question. Where did the body come from? I made my decision. If this was some sort of trap, I'd make sure I could easily get back to the car. I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. Leaving the car running, I opened it and brought a foot down on the blacktop. Nothing. I climbed out of the car, leaving the door wide open. I stood up and looked around me. Nothing. I opened the back door, leaned in and grabbed my flashlight. I flicked it on and closed the door behind me. I turned and made my way towards the body. Nothing. I reached it. It had been damaged by the car, sure, but was still practically in one piece. I took my shirt off, my heart pounding for the split second it covered my eyes. The cold air bit my skin, but I fought through it. I used my worn short as a winch of sorts, wrapping it in a knot around the body's two arms. I grabbed the other end and started to drag her back around my car. Nothing. I heaved the body into the trunk, slamming it shut behind it. With my left hand shaking uncontrollably, I got back in the driver's seat, put my jacket on, and began to move the car off the road and into the desert. I descended onto the rough soil with a thud and slowly meandered further out until the road disappeared behind me. Once I reached an area that I hoped no one would find, I cautiously got out again. The dust beneath my boots shifted as I walked. I took the shovel from the back seat and balanced it over my shoulder. Standing in front of the trunk, I set the shovel down and balanced my flashlight in my mouth. I reached down with both hands and heaved it up. The thing from earlier leapt out. At first, my brain didn't register what had happened. It wasn't until it had me on my back with its hands clutching my throat did I realize. The flashlight was still in my mouth, shining brightly into its painted face. Its eyes were pure white and murderous. The jaw was torn down further than human anatomy allows, and its skin looked like dried leaves barely connected to the flesh. Black spots appeared in my vision as the monster tried to tear my life away. Just before I passed out, my hand found a large, jagged rock. I swung my arm in an arc, bringing the rock down on the base of the thing's skull. It relinquished its grip, falling back long enough for me to get to my feet. I grabbed the shovel and brought it crashing down on the thing's head, buckling its neck. I lifted it again, primed for a second swing, when suddenly the thing flailed its right arm wildly in the air. As it did, the wooden handle of my shovel erupted into flame. Hands sizzling, I dropped the tool and bolted towards my car. The witch, or whatever was trying to kill me, descended to all fours. As I slammed the door shut, it reared up, head butting the window. A large crack appeared as my car began to move, the uneven terrain brutalizing the suspension. The grotesque witch clung to the frame as I swerved violently. Its skull began to shift under the skin. Before it could transform, I drove into the one structure in the area, a lone standing rock. I turned just before a head-on collision became inescapable. The rock scraped against the side of the car like an iceberg against the hull of a great ship. The witch was pummeled against it as well, and went flying off into the darkness. Eventually, the light from my headlamps illuminated the road, and I was once again driving on open highway. Not even for a second did I think I was safe, and my paranoia became wholly justified when I heard the now familiar pounding against the asphalt. A glance in my mirror confirmed that the wish was once again gaining on me. Its legs were bent like a jackal's, or rather the bones were, with the flesh begrudgingly following the new form of their frame. The rest of its body remained humanoid for now. I accelerated to several times above the speed limit. As the witch began to fade back into the darkness as I outpaced it, I heard a low hissing. Suddenly, the hatch to my glove compartment fell open. Dozens of writhing rattlesnakes poured out like liquid, filling the car's floor and darting between the pedals. More and more slithered from every opening in the now ruined Cadillac surrounding me. I started to, unwisely, beat my head against the stirring wheel and scream. When I jerked back and looked around, the car was free of snakes once again. I realized that I hadn't been bitten, and that my hands passed through the reptiles like vapor. I felt the cold hand of the witch clawing at my brain from within, attempting to induce whatever nightmare hallucination it so chooses. I shook my head violently, trying to free myself from it. When I opened my eyes, the warlock's face was pressed against the passenger side window. I accelerated again, leaving it trying to catch up behind me. As I drove, the retro radio built into the wood-veneered dash crackled and popped. From the static, a voice appeared. Deep and chanting, it soon became audible over the engine's roar. It screamed out in a language I couldn't begin to fathom. The anti-melody continued, and as it did, my eyes began to water. Soon it felt like hornets were stinging them, tiny needles pricking in and out a dozen times a second. The pain was unbearable, and the half-shattered mirror confirmed that I was now crying blood. I swerved erratically from lane to lane, even mounting the desert sporadically. My hand found the radio and I punched it and kept pounding until my hand disappeared into the mess of wires. I withdrew my now bloodied, broken hand from the ruined stereo, and it went back to clutching the wheel as best it could. A giant gangrenous coyote was now running by my car. As my vision returned and the pain, at least the pain in my eyes, subsided, I tried to make the beast out. I couldn't tell if it was another hallucination or the witch transformed. Either way, I knew I couldn't keep going forever. The Cadillac, which was physically near destruction, was also now running on fumes. I knew I couldn't keep going for long, and the merciful part of my brain prevented me from thinking of what would happen when I stopped. And that's when it happened. I almost didn't notice it, and when it registered, I didn't think it of any importance. There was a line running through the road where one era of paving began and another ended. I passed it with ease, but the beast, on the other hand, came to an abrupt halt like a car slamming into a brick wall. I left it in a cloud of dust, its howling coated with a distinctly human frustration. I drove in silence for a few minutes. Silence was welcomed with open arms. I had practically sunken into my leather seats and was driving on complete autopilot. My brain played a reel of memories from the past few hours as it tried to tackle this incomprehensible scenario. It had no luck in doing so and eventually gave up. I started to slowly calm until a voice piped up behind me. "I warned you," said Hank. I looked into the mirror and saw him sitting in the seat directly behind mine. I paused for a while before answering. "Are you real?" I said in a broken voice, terrified the witch might still be chained to my mind. "I used to be," he replied somberly. He sighed and took his hat from his head, clutching it to his chest. I now saw what it was hiding. His scalp had been cut away, exposing the dome of his skull. A ring of scabbing tissue circled his head like a crown of thorns, a remnant from his trauma. "What are you?" I asked. "Trapped," he replied singularly. I looked back at the road ahead. A little stream was starting to rise from beneath the battered hood, but I decided to ignore it for now. "What was that thing?" I said, knowing he'd understand the question. "He's been out here as long as I have," said Hank, glancing out the window. I waited for more of an answer, but none came. A dull glow appeared on the horizon, which grew in intensity as we neared. Soon it took the form of the gas station. "Drop me off here," Hank asked, breaking a pattern of silence. I did as I was told, bringing the car to a stop just outside the pull-in. Hank opened the door and got out without thanking me. He walked around to where a young girl, Plum, was waiting for him. I noticed 2 arrows were now protruding from her abdomen. He took her hand and I watched as they both walked inside. By the grace of God, my car started moving again and I was away. It did, however, die shortly after the sun rose. I left the now burning hunk of metal in a ditch and walked a mile or so until a haulage truck passed. It stopped for me and I rode with him to El Paso. He was old, in his late 60s if I had to guess, and had a scruffy beard like an unwashed dog. I could see in his eyes that he did not know what lies beyond the veil. I have been on the run since that day, mainly from my employers. The body was disposed of safely, sure, but I never met with my handler and certain questions were raised after they found what was left of the car they had supplied. When I say on the run, I mean I've been living a quiet life in a small town in rural Oregon. I'm a permanent resident and handyman at the B&B of a sweet old lady who reminded me of the woman who raised me. For me, it really is a quiet life, as since that night I haven't been able to speak. I often stand in front of the mirror and try to talk to myself, but the words are lost at sea and never quite make it out from my mouth. Naturally, I've taken to writing and think it's finally time you all know my story. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to Story 4. I was assigned to replace a dead linguist. No one told me he was still walking. I should have known something was wrong when Captain Varney pulled me into his office. It was late 2005, maybe early 2006, when the Iraq War had turned into an everlasting mess of patrols and ambushes around Baghdad. I was only a sergeant in the 4th Infantry, a linguist who picked up Arabic Kurdish and a bit of Farsi from a few years at the Defense Language Institute. Most of my days were spent translating radio chatter or calming down locals during raids, routine stuff. I was trying to just do my time and get the hell out of the army. I joined for the benefits, not the glory, then this war popped off and I got stuck. The air that night was thick with diesel fumes. Varney looked haggard, his eyes were bloodshot under the flickering bulb of his makeshift office. "Sergeant Mullins," he said, not looking up from his desk, "you're being reassigned. Effective immediately." I blinked. "Sir?" Reassigned where? I don't know, but whoever it is, they are from the compound, Varney said. His voice was flat, like he was reading a death notice. They lost their linguist, and you're the best we've got right now. Report to the compound at 0400, that's all I know. The compound was a fenced-off brick building in the far corner of our forward operating base. We called it a "Don't Look at Me" compound. You don't look at it, you don't talk about it, and if anyone asks you about it, you've never heard of it. The rumors ran from CIA to Special Forces to Blackwater contractors or something else entirely. I showed up at the gate at 0350. A man was already waiting for me. "You the talker?" he said, voice like gravel. "Yes, sir. Arabic, Kurdish, and a bit of Farsi," I answered, trying to keep steady. His eyes scanned me, cold and measuring. "Good. You listen, you translate, you keep your mouth shut. Clear?" He turned without waiting for an answer. "Name's Ramiel." The compound's interior felt wrong. The building was much colder than the night air, and smelled faintly like damp stone, a smell that shouldn't have been anywhere near Baghdad. Ramiel led me down a narrow hallway with steel doors the whole time, not saying a word, or even glancing at me. We stopped at the end of the hall and entered a small room. Inside, 2 people in desert camo stood around a folding table littered with satellite maps and photographs. "This is Sergeant Mullins," Ramiel said. "He's replacing Dr. Dyer." A woman in her late 30s looked up. Her eyes were sharp, but there was something behind them, maybe exhaustion, maybe fear. Nobody said what happened to Dr. Dyer. Nobody had to. The woman slid an envelope toward me. Inside were 2 photographs. The first, grainy and dim, showed a carved stone arch buried in sand, symbols etched into it in an ancient script I didn't recognize. The second showed the same arch, but this time one word was clear in Akkadian: return. I tried asking Ramiel about what we were doing here, but he cut me off saying, "You'll know when it matters." A few hours later, we rolled out in a battered civilian truck, no markings, no flags. The desert swallowed us fast, Baghdad's orange haze shrinking in the rear view until there was nothing but black sky and white moonlight. No one spoke. The woman, Dr. Hales, I'd learned, kept her eyes on the horizon, her finger drumming against a Bible wedged in her lap. I couldn't help but notice the way certain verses were underlined, the pages worn thin. I caught one glimpse when she turned a page. "The dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live." Ramiel drove, knuckles pale on the wheel. Something about him made my stomach twist, not fear exactly, but the sense that if I looked too long, I'd see something I shouldn't. Next to me was a man who had not yet spoken. He was dressed in army greens with a trauma kit slinged on his back, so I assumed he was our medic. I tried to talk to him, but he just stared silently, and I got the message. We drove west for what felt like hours until we reached a small village, or what was left of it, near the Euphrates River. The locals became skittish when Ramiel hopped out of the car. An old woman came up to me telling us in Arabic not to go and that the king's shadow walks. When I was about to respond, Ramiel called me over and told me to stay close, that we would be on foot for the next few miles. As we walked, I wondered what the hell that old lady was talking about. Go where? What king? Did she mean Saddam? Saddam had been captured and locked up for over a year now. The sun beat down on us brutally, but I seemed to be the only one that was fazed by it. The sand under my boots felt strange, too soft in some places, almost like it had been turned recently. I kept telling myself it was just wind erosion, but the patterns didn't look like the work of wind. I had been all over Iraq and had never seen sand like this. It looked almost deliberate. Ramiel led the way without slowing, his boots crunching over the cracked earth. Dr. Hales trailed close behind him, reading from a small notebook in one hand, the Bible still tucked under her arm. Every so often I caught her murmuring under her breath, but it wasn't English, it wasn't Arabic either. It sounded older, guttural, like the syllables had to be forced out of the throat. The medic still hadn't spoken. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, scanning the dunes like he was expecting someone or something to crest them at any moment. After an hour, we passed what was left of a stone wall half buried in sand. The carvings on it were faded, but I could still make out fragments of cuneiform. My training kicked in. The words were broken, incomplete, but I read enough to feel my stomach drop. The Yites, king crossed the waters. The king drank of the well, the king shall rise again. A few feet past the wall, we found bones, human by the look of them, bleached white from the sun. They weren't scattered like a battle site, they were laid out in a careful line pointing toward the west. "Don't touch them," Ramiel said without turning his head. I wanted to ask how he even knew I was looking, but before I could, Dr. Hales stopped walking. Ahead of us, the desert floor dipped into a wide, shallow basin. At its center was the arch from the photographs, exactly as I'd seen it, only now. Up close, I could see the carvings pulsing faintly in the shadows, like they were catching light from somewhere underground. A wind picked up, hot and dry, carrying with it the faint scent of water. Impossible this far into the desert. Ramiel turned to me for the first time since we left the truck. "You're up, Sergeant. Read the door." I stepped closer, tracing my eyes along the cuneiform etched into the keystone. The main inscription was clear now. "Return unto me, and I will give you life everlasting." But there was something else. A second line, half hidden beneath centuries of grit. I brushed away the sand with my sleeve, revealing jagged, uneven symbols that didn't match any Mesopotamian script I knew. The air changed the second I stepped under the arch. It wasn't just cooler, it felt thick, like moving through water. My ears popped, and for a moment I swore I could hear voices whispering in languages I didn't know, layered on top of each other, rising and falling like the tide. A staircase of carved stone led down into darkness. Ramiel went first, his steps slow but sure, as if he'd walked this path before. Dr. Hales followed, flipping open her Bible and running her finger along a passage without reading it aloud. The medic was behind me now, and I could feel his eyes on my back the whole way down. We descended for what felt like forever, the light from the surface shrinking into a pinprick above us. The walls here were covered in more inscriptions, some in Akkadian, some in something older than Sumer, older than anything I'd seen in the books back at DLI. The Akkadian ones I could read. "The king sleeps in the deep. The flood could not take him. Death could not hold him." Another read, "When the trumpet sounds, the gates shall open and the dust shall walk." The biblical echo hit me immediately. Trumpets, the dead walking. I thought of Revelation, of Sunday school warnings about the final days. The stairwell ended in a vast stone chamber. At its center stood a sarcophagus, massive, black, and inlaid with gold that still gleamed after what had to be thousands of years. Carved into its lid was a figure wearing a horned crown, eyes closed, arms crossed over his chest. Gilgamesh. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew this place was not natural. The king who sought immortality and, according to every historian I knew, failed. Only he hadn't. Dr. Hales stepped forward, setting her Bible on the lid. She whispered something in that ancient guttural language again, and the gold inlay began to glow. The whispering in the air grew louder, resolving into words I could finally understand. "I have seen the deep. I have held the plant of life. I return." The lid shifted, stone grinding against stone. A crack split across its length, and the smell that poured out wasn't rot. It was damp earth, like the banks of the Euphrates after a flood. A hand, pale and too long at the joints, slid through the gap. On its wrist was a battered Casio watch, the kind you only saw on guys who'd been in country a long time. The glass was cracked, the strap frayed like it had been worn for years. I froze, unsure why Ramiel's expression had gone from stone-faced to something darker. The lid ground open wider and the rest of the figure emerged. A man in torn desert fatigues but moving wrong, every motion too smooth, too precise. His eyes caught the torchlight and flared, almost golden. "That was our linguist," Ramiel said, voice low. "Dr. Dyer, or what's left of him." I'd never met the man, but hearing his name here in this place made the hair on my arms rise. The thing smiled, and it wasn't the smile of someone glad to see old friends. It was possession, ownership. "Translate for me, linguist," it said in flawless Akkadian. "Tell them their king has returned." I backed up until my shoulders hit the cold stone wall. My training told me to reach for my rifle, but some deeper instinct told me it wouldn't matter. Dr. Hales didn't move. She stood with her head bowed, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Or maybe recitation. I couldn't tell if it was for God or for the thing in front of us. Ramiel stepped forward, drawing a knife that looked older than the tomb itself. "We can end this before..." The chamber shook. A low groan rolled through the stone like the world itself was shifting. From above came the heavy final sound of something massive slamming into place. The faint light from the stairwell vanished. We were sealed in. Gilgamesh turned his head toward the sound, unfazed. "The gate closes when the trumpet sounds," he murmured as if to himself. "But the dead do not rest." Water began to seep between the seams in the floor, dark and cold. My boots were wet within minutes. It carried with it that same scent from earlier, the river after a flood. I tried to get to the stairs, but the way was blocked by a slab of stone that hadn't been there before. No seams, no hinges. Just smooth, ancient rock where the entrance had been. "Containment," Ramiel growled without looking at me. "They knew the risk. If he woke, no one leaves." Dr. Hales opened her eyes. "The water will rise. That's how they keep him. We drown with the king." Gilgamesh stepped down from the sarcophagus, every motion precise, fluid. His eyes locked on me. "You speak the tongue," he said. "You will carry my words when the flood recedes. That is how it has always been." "I'm not carrying anything," I muttered, rifle still trained on him. He smiled, not cruel, not mocking, almost pitying. "You will." The water was halfway to my knees now. The chamber's walls seemed to breathe with the rising tide, and the carvings shimmered in the torchlight, shifting into scenes of cities drowning crowned kings walking through crowds of the dead. Emil looked at me sharply. "There's another way out. But it's not for all of us." The implication was clear. Someone had to stay to seal the door again. Someone had to keep the king from following. Gilgamesh tilted his head, watching us decide. "Choose wisely," he said in Akkadian. "The flood takes the unworthy first." The water was to my waist now, icy enough to burn. Every breath tasted of silt. Ramiel pointed to a shadowed crack in the far wall just above the waterline. Narrow, jagged, barely big enough for a man to squeeze through. "That leads to the outer ravine. It's the only way out before the chamber floods, but once you're through..." He glanced at Gilgamesh. "You have to collapse it, no hesitation." Dr. Hales shook her head. "If he reaches the surface..." "I know," Ramiel said. The water climbed higher. Somewhere deep in the tomb, a low rumble began, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Ramiel locked eyes with me. "You get out, Mullins. You tell them. I'll hold him here." I didn't argue. I couldn't. My legs were already moving toward the crack in the wall, sloshing through the rising black water. Behind me, I heard Ramiel muttering something in that ancient, guttural tongue, the sound almost swallowed by the rushing tide. Gilgamesh's voice answered in kind, calm and patient, like two old soldiers discussing a war long past. I pulled myself into the crevice, stones scraping my arms and chest. The light from the chamber grew smaller, fainter. Then a splash, loud and violent, followed by silence. When I finally reached daylight, I was on my hands and knees in a dry ravine, gasping air like a drowning man. The sun was too bright, the sky too clean. I looked back at the hole I'd crawled from. It was already caved in, just rubble now. No sound, no movement. Want to believe he's still down there. That Ramiel kept his word, that the flood swallowed them both. But sometimes at night I hear water running where it shouldn't be. I hear footsteps in the hallway when I'm alone. And last week in the market I saw a tall man in the crowd wearing a battered Casio watch. If you're reading this, stay away from the ruins near the Euphrates. If you hear someone speaking in a language you can't place, run. Don't look back, because the king's shadow walks. And when he returns, it won't just be Baghdad that drowns. Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. I moved into my grandparents' cabin. I don't think I'm alone here. When my grandfather passed, I inherited his cabin by the lake. It wasn't much, one story, drafty in winter, built back when insulation meant more wood. But it was quiet, peaceful. At least that's what I thought. I moved in last fall. The air smelled like wet pine, and the lake behind the house looked like black glass at night. I'd stand on the back porch with a beer, listening to crickets and the occasional splash from fish breaking the surface. For the first month, it was perfect. No neighbors for a mile, no traffic, no city noise. Then I started hearing it. The first time it was around 2 a.m. I'd fallen asleep on the couch and woke up to what sounded like someone slowly dragging a shovel through the mud outside. Long, wet scrapes. Pauses between them like they were listening for something. I sat up, held my breath, and it stopped. The next morning I checked the shore. There was a line in the mud about 4 inches deep, starting from the tree line and ending at the water's edge. No footprints. Just that strange trench. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the cabin at night. I kept the curtains closed, but every so often I'd hear that same dragging sound outside, always starting in the woods and heading toward the water, always stopping when I got too close to the windows. One night in December, I caught it. I woke to the sound again, this time closer, growled, right outside the porch. I crept to the back door and pulled aside the curtain just enough to peek. There was something standing in the frost-covered yard, backlit by the moon. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with limbs too long for its body. Its skin hung in loose folds like it had been stretched over the wrong frame. It was holding something in one hand, a stick maybe, No, not a stick. It was a long, pale spine. The sound I'd heard was it dragging the tip of it through the frozen dirt. Its head... God, its head. It didn't have a face, not in the way we do. Just a long vertical slit opening and closing like gills flexing in the cold air. I must have made some noise because its head snapped toward me. That slit opening wide enough to show rows of needle-thin teeth inside. Then it turned and walked into the lake, not into the shallows. Straight in, until the water swallowed it whole. I tried to convince myself I was dreaming, but over the next week I found more of those trenches in the mud, always leading to the water, always starting closer to the cabin. Last night it changed. I woke to the sound again, dragging slow, but this time it didn't stop. It moved around the cabin, circling it, once, twice. Then it stopped at the front door, the porch creaked. And then I heard it tapping. Something sharp, rapping on the wood in slow, steady beats. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. like it was waiting. I didn't open the door. I waited with a kitchen knife in my hand until dawn. When I finally got the nerve to check outside, the porch was covered in frost except for where it had stood. The boards there were slick with something that wasn't ice. It was thick, almost gelatinous, and smelled faintly like blood. It's almost midnight now. The cabin feels smaller somehow. The lake's black surface is perfectly still, and somewhere out there I can hear it dragging that spine again. This time coming from the shoreline toward me. I think it's getting bolder. I double-checked every lock in the cabin. Front door, back door, windows, even the crawlspace hatch under the kitchen. Every latch slid into place with a soft click that felt far too quiet against the sound outside. The dragging had stopped. That was worse. I stood in the living room, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, listening. The only sound was my own breathing, quick, uneven. Then from somewhere behind the cabin I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak of wood under weight. The back porch. I forced myself to keep still, every muscle in my body rigid. The sound came again, closer this time, and then there was a new one. The faint rasp of nails or claws tracing the length of the siding. It was walking the perimeter. The scratching moved from the back to the side, dragging low near the foundation, then high up by the windows. Testing the walls. Measuring me. I thought about turning on the outside floodlight. Then I thought about the possibility of seeing it. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the flashlight. When it reached the front of the cabin, it stopped. Silence again. I kept my eyes on the door, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, the tapping. 3 slow knocks, each one heavier than the last, making the door shudder in its frame. Pause. 3 more. It did that for nearly a minute. Then the sound changed. A wet, rhythmic thud against the wood, like it was pressing something heavy into the door and dragging it down. I imagined that pale spine slick with whatever was on the porch boards the night before, leaving streaks down the grain. I backed away toward the bedroom, still facing the door. My plan was to lock myself in, maybe wedge the dresser against it. But before I could move more than a few steps, the cabin groaned. Not from the door. From above. My stomach dropped. The roof. I could hear it moving, each step bending the old beams just enough to make them moan. It was slow, deliberate, pacing the length of the house like a predator above a cage. Dust drifted down from the ceiling fan as it stopped directly over me. That's when I heard it breathe. It wasn't the kind of breath you take through lungs. It was a deep, vibrating pull of air that made the walls hum. Like the cabin itself was being inhaled. And mixed into it was a faint, wet, clicking like teeth snapping together in some private rhythm. I didn't move, didn't blink. My legs felt hollow, barely able to hold me up. Then something fell from the ceiling. It landed right in front of me. A piece of wood no bigger than my thumb, splintered and dark with moisture. I looked up, and for the briefest second I saw it between the slats. That slit where its face should be, teeth flexing inside, wet with strands of something that clung like spider silk. It slid out of view again. That was it. I bolted for the bedroom and locked the door. I shoved the dresser in front of it, then sat on the floor with my back against the wall, knife pointed at the door like I'd be able to do anything if it came in. It paced the roof for what felt like hours. Every so often it would stop and I'd hear that long, deep inhale again. Only this time I realized it wasn't drawing in the cabin. It was smelling me. At some point the pacing stopped entirely. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I strained to hear anything. Footsteps, scratching, the drag of the spine. But there was nothing. I thought maybe it had left. Then the bedroom window behind me began to bulge. The glass didn't crack, It didn't shatter. It pushed inward like something was pressing against it from outside. The bulge grew, stretching until I could see the faintest outline of that slit, teeth just barely visible behind the thin distortion of the glass. It didn't strike. It didn't try to break in. It just stayed there, breathing against the window until the pain was fogged over from the inside. And then, so slowly I almost missed it, the fog began to pull back like it was drawing my air out with it. When the sun finally rose, the window was clear. The roof was empty, the porch was bare, but in the frost at the end of the driveway I found a single mark, a trench in the dirt, starting at the road and ending at my front steps. It's almost midnight again now, and I can hear it coming back. I'd been awake all day, no naps, no dozing on the couch. I wanted to be alert for tonight. Didn't matter. When darkness settled over the lake, the exhaustion hit me like a drug. My eyelids felt weighted, my head thick and heavy. It wasn't just lack of sleep. It felt imposed, like the air was laced with something pulling me under. I fought it by pacing the cabin, flashlights sweeping every corner. The walls creaked in the cold, but beneath that I could hear the lake, a soft, constant lap, lap, lap of water on the shore. And over it faintly, that dragging sound again. I killed every light inside. If it wanted to see me, it would have to look through the dark. I stationed myself in the kitchen where I could see both the front and back doors. The dragging came closer, circling the cabin, then it stopped. I didn't hear it for almost 5 minutes. Then the sound came again, inside the walls. The noise was subtle at first, like something brushing along the insulation. Then it got heavier, shifting, moving from the kitchen wall toward the living room. The boards shivered with each scrape, like it was wedging itself through spaces too small for anything human. I backed up, keeping the knife raised. The sound reached the corner where the chimney met the wall, and stopped. A soft, hollow thunk came from the fireplace. I'd never used it. The flue had been closed since I moved in. Now the metal lever clinked once, twice, before the cover inside began to bulge downward. Bits of soot fell into the empty hearth. Something was forcing the flue open from the wrong direction. The cover gave with a sharp, metallic ping, swinging down hard enough to rattle the fire tools on their hooks. For a moment, there was only darkness inside. Then a hand slid into view. It was too long, too thin. The skin was that same loose folded hide I'd seen before, but it shifted unnaturally like something was swimming just beneath it. The fingers bent in ways they shouldn't as they searched along the brick, tapping and probing. They reached the edge of the hearth and stopped. The tips turned upward toward me, slowly, deliberately. I stepped back. The fingers curled into a beckoning motion. I don't remember deciding to run, but suddenly I was in the bedroom, shoving the dresser harder against the door than before. My breath came in quick bursts, and each one felt stolen from me. For a few minutes, I heard nothing. Then, faint, nearly inaudible, came a tapping from the other side of the bedroom wall. It started near the floor, rose higher, then higher still until it was right over my head. That's when I remembered the attic. The cabin didn't have a proper attic, just a low crawl space above the ceiling, accessible from a panel in the hallway. I could hear the sound moving across it now, the boards flexing with each crawl. The panel creaked. It didn't fall open. Instead, I saw one corner pressed downward slightly like something was testing it. A single hairline crack appeared in the wood, then another. Dust fell in thin streams, and in the dust were little wet spots, like condensation from breath. I held the knife so tight my hand went numb. I was ready for the panel to drop, ready for it to pour through. But it didn't. Instead, the sound moved back across the ceiling toward the living room. And then came the worst part. Silence. I sat there for nearly an hour before I worked up the courage to check. I slid the dresser away in small jerks, every creak loud enough to make my chest ache. When I stepped into the hall, the panel was flush again, no sign it had moved. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. Even the hearth looked untouched. I started to think maybe it had given up. Then I saw the front door. The deadbolt was still locked. The chain was still in place. But the entire door frame was subtly warped, bowed inward like it had been under immense pressure from the outside. And in the center of the door, pressed into the wood, was the shape of a handprint. Too large, too thin, with fingers that tapered into points. It hadn't been trying to get in through one way. It had been testing all of them. I'm writing this now as the sun comes up, but I don't know how much longer I can stay here. It's learning the cabin, learning me. Last night it tried the roof, the walls, the fireplace, the attic, and the door. Tonight it might not try at all. Tonight it might succeed. I didn't sleep at all today. Not that it matters anymore. I nailed the windows shut, wedge-locked the doors, stuffed blankets in the fireplace and duct-taped them in place. Even put a chair under the attic panel so I'd hear it fall. The cabin feels like a coffin I've built for myself. The lake is wrong tonight. It's too still, like the water itself is holding its breath. Even the crickets have gone silent. The air feels thicker, almost humid, but cold enough to make my teeth ache. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with the knife and flashlight in front of me. I keep telling myself I'm ready, that if it comes, I'll know where to hit. But there's no plan here, no strategy, just waiting. The first sound isn't dragging, it's knocking. Not at the door, but from inside the walls. It's moving fast, circling me in tight loops, the sound bouncing from one corner of the cabin to the next. The boards are trembling, dust falling in little showers. Then the knocks stop. From somewhere above, the roof bows inward, creaking under weight. I glance at the attic panel. Still closed, still pinned under the chair. Something drips onto the kitchen table. I look up. The ceiling above me is damp, water stains spreading outward in a slow bloom. But it's not water. It's that same gelatinous, faintly bloody stuff I found on the porch weeks ago. Another drop lands on my hand. It's warm. The attic panel doesn't open. It bursts, knocking the chair aside, wood splintering as something unfolds itself through the gap. I see limbs first, too many to count in the moment, sliding down the wall, folding over the counter, bracing against the floor. And then the head. That slit where its face should be flexes wide, and I hear it. Not a roar, not a hiss, but a deep inhalation that makes the lights flicker. The air feels thinner instantly, my chest tightening as it pulls at something deeper than breath. I run. I don't remember making the choice, but suddenly I'm at the back door, kicking the chair away from the handle, fumbling with the locks. Behind me, the thing's limbs slap against the floor in uneven rhythm, scraping, reaching. I slam the door open and bolt into the night. The cold bites through me immediately, the air wet and sharp. The lake's black surface stares back at me, and for a second I consider running for the tree line instead. But there's movement between the pines. Too tall. Too thin. More than one. The water is my only option. I make it halfway down the slope before something hits the porch behind me. The sound is heavy, final, like it's dropped from the roof to give chase. I don't look back. I can hear it, though, that wet spine dragging through the grass as it runs. The shoreline is slick. I nearly fall as I hit the shallows, but I don't stop. I dive into the freezing water, kicking hard until the cabin is a shadow against the hill. I turn then, just to see if it followed. It's standing at the shore, perfectly still, watching. The slit in its head opens wide, teeth flashing in the moonlight, and then it does something I haven't heard before. It laughs. Not a human laugh, not even close. But the rhythm is there, the rise and fall, like it's mocking me for thinking the lake could save me. Then it steps forward into the water. I don't remember swimming to the far side. I don't remember climbing out. I remember waking up at dawn on the gravel road, barefoot, shivering so hard I couldn't speak. The sheriff drove me into town. I didn't tell him what happened. I just said someone broke in. He offered to send someone to check the property, but I told him to let it go, because I know what they'll find. Nothing. I'm writing this from a motel 20 miles away, but I can't stop looking at the bathroom door. It's shut, but every now and then I hear a faint dripping sound behind it. If you're anywhere near the lake east of Miller's Crossing, if you hear dragging in the night, don't look out the window. It doesn't matter how well you lock the doors. It's already inside. Story 5 ends here now. Settle in for story 6. Recently I got so close to death that I was officially dead. However, I saw something when I came back, and it saw me too. Around 2 weeks ago, I was hit by a car and got so close to dying that the paramedics overseeing me were convinced I was dead. But I was able to pull myself together just long enough to be brought to a hospital. While this was pleasant, considering I didn't die, I was still unable to really recover mentally. Turns out dying does more to you than the stories would tell. And I know damn well that I never saw any hellfire or witnessed the divine light of heaven. I woke up in a hospital bed about 2 days after the accident. Both my legs broken and my arm nearly shattered. It was barely salvaged, but it survived mostly. I was also mostly intact, aside from the fact that I now have a permanent scar on the right side of my face and my right eye doesn't always work, kind of flickery. I was wondering what happened, and my fiancé was sitting beside the medical bed. He was surprised that I was awake since the doctors were convinced I was comatose, especially with my brain waves as a factor in the situation. He explained the situation to the best of his ability, and I was left to fill in the pieces from the fragments of my memory. I wasn't concerned about how I died, mostly because I could remember it. But I was more interested in the aftermath, which was uninteresting for the most part. According to my fiancé, the paramedics were trying to use chest compressions, but my condition was only worsening, until I flatlined on the ground. They were convinced I was dead and were prepared to give up, until my heartbeat suddenly spiked, and I was back to breathing, as if God had given me a second chance. Nobody can really explain it, he started. It's like 1 minute you were gone and the next, you were just back. Like magic. Now, I grew up an atheist, kind of the reason I never really cared whether I'd see heaven or hell when I finally clicked off. But when I felt the cold embrace of death, I felt something else. Kind of like cosmic eyes looking at me until I was suddenly thrust into my body, then I blacked out. I can't explain it, and I spent the corresponding week researching various kinds of mythology and folklore on the internet as a result. But my search yielded few results. I found thousands of pages about ghosts, gods, reapers, and God knows what else. At best, I'd found the stories of reapers to be the most interesting, but nothing fit my situation. I began to wonder if I'd just felt something akin to hallucination since I was on the brink of death. But every time I felt that thought creep in, I'd feel the cold embrace returning, kind of like arms wrapping around my throat, but never feeling the choking as a result. Just the coldness. Sometimes I'd let the thought linger just to feel that cold embrace, as if I subconsciously wanted to feel the sensation. Then about 3 days ago, I felt a new sensation, nothing sensual but curious. Whenever the thought lingered long enough, I'd feel the coldness shift, like fingers moving, and it'd begin creeping down my back before pausing just above my pelvis, stopping right at the point where my spine connects with my pelvis bone. With some help from my fiancé, I was able to deduce that sometime during or after the accident, I'd gotten a small black marking at the exact spot where I'd feel the fingers stop. Using this mark as a branch point, I broadened my search. eventually coming across something that felt accurate. However, it wasn't ordinary folklore. Truthfully, it wasn't folklore at all, but it was, ashamedly, the seemingly crazed ramblings of somebody online. They spoke of entities that assisted death, acting as her assistants, being the reapers that humans had spent centuries fearing and believing in. My fiancé, bless his heart, was far from trusting this random guy online, and suggested I not entertain his crazed ideas. I was fully in agreement, but I knew that this might be my only lead, so I went against his wishes and continued my research. It was the dead of night, 12 days since my accident, and I discovered something unknowable. The thing I saw when I died was called a visitor, and it was considered an angel of death, similar to the biblical one that took firstborns from Egypt. They were believed to be the first generation of reapers and assisted death in the collection of souls across the cosmos. They were considered beautiful but impossible to look upon at the same time, as gazing into their infinitely black eyes would spell your inevitable demise. Not only that, but they were classified as being humanoid but possessing large black feathered wings, similar to many interpretations of angels. Just black wings instead of white ones. By morning, I practically knew everything about the visitors that was possible, with my fiancé being more worried about me than I thought possible. He was hesitant to leave me now, especially with how I'd been acting since the accident. So I was forced to keep him around by the night of my 14th day in the hospital. I'd left my bed and was traveling to the basement of the hospital, keeping my phone on hand to help with the summoning ritual. The user I was getting all my information from was surprisingly blunt, with detailed instructions on contacting or summoning a visitor. The ritual itself required recite the incantation listed while proceeding with all further steps. Audi vocem meam o magnum telum mortis. Ausculta vocationem meam et procede ut eiquem capere non potuisti occurras. Audi vocem meam o magnum telum mortis. Ausculta vocationem meam et mihi obvia mire. Eicem capere non potuisti mihi obvia mirete ipsum revela. Salt to act as a cleansing agent, water to act as the fluctuating nature of life and death, and the blood of the person who had interacted with the visitor in question, my blood, which I was able to procure using my fiancé's pocket knife, taken when he'd fallen asleep after sharing one of my entertaining stories about an old hiking trip I'd taken years ago. With all of the ingredients, I was able to prepare the ritual, putting them together in a pudding cup I cleaned out. Now I was confined to a wheelchair, so putting everything together was harder than you'd think, especially with both legs and one arm busted. But I was determined as hell to get it done. First, I added the salt, sprinkling it in while mumbling the incantation to myself. With the salt added, I poured the water into the pudding cup, continuing the incantation. Once both were added, I raised the pocket knife, put it against the palm of my injured hand, and sliced open my flesh, feeling the warm liquid oozing down and into the pudding cup as I held it overhead. As soon as enough liquid had entered, I covered my hand with a bandage I'd brought with me, and held the pudding cup in the air while resuming the ritual. At first, nothing happened, even after I'd finished the incantation. As a result, I was rightfully pissed, since I was under the impression that I'd been tricked, and that I would need to explain to my fiancé that I'd cut myself trying to summon a fake entity. However, the pudding cup was knocked from my hand, falling to the ground, and spilling the contents across the ground. At least it would have done had it not been entirely emptied out. I was left stunned, since the pudding cup was filled less than a second before, but had been entirely emptied in less than a moment before it was knocked down. Not only that, but I could feel the room suddenly becoming colder, even though it was already quite cold. I could actively feel the temperature dropping until I was hugging my chest in hopes of warming myself up, but stopped when I heard it. Footsteps. Loud, clanking footsteps. At first I was wondering if a janitor or a doctor had followed me down here, or had heard me doing the incantation. But my considerations were dashed when a human stepped into view, but he was unfamiliar and surprisingly attractive. He looked about my age, if a year older, and barely looked much older than 32. I was going to ask who he was until his jacket shifted and the back burst open, revealing a pair of large, feathery wings blacker than the night sky when the moon was absent. Figured this'd answer your question better than words would, since it's fairly obvious. He chuckled. The stories weren't wrong. His eyes were empty pits of solid black tar, and his smile crept across his face. Yet I noticed how wrong he seemed to be, like staring at the uncanny valley of an unusually realistic picture. Everything about this guy was so perfect and yet so wrong, like he was some kind of imitation of a person rather than an actual one. What are you? I asked. You already know the answer, so why not ask a better one? He responded, almost bored. Besides, you summoned me, I assume you've got better questions rather than the obvious. I was paused, as if stuck in the consideration phase. Who are you? I rumbled. Now that is a better question. He smiled, almost too wide. The name's Dylan, and I'm your visitor. Okay, I responded. Why? Why what? He wondered. Why are you my visitor? I continued. Simple. That's what the boss wanted, so I simply obliged. I've learned it's better not to ask questions, especially when the boss can get pretty upset, he explained, his eyes briefly widening, as if the concept of upsetting his boss frightened him. You were there when I died, weren't you? I proposed. Yeah, the boss sent me when she felt you fading, said I needed to make sure you didn't. So I gave you a good wing blast and you shot right back into that sexy meat suit of yours. He revealed, his mouth opening slightly, revealing the slightly sharpened fangs protruding from his gums. Why? That's a loaded question, but to answer it simply. Some people can't die until their time comes. You weren't meant to go, so I couldn't let you. Pretty simple, he explained. How is that possible? I'm just some guy, I'm not that important, I retorted. Oh, that's what everybody thinks. They always believe they're meaningless, but they are so far from it. Every living thing, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal. Each has an important place in the natural order of life and death, he exclaimed. So don't hold yourself so down, otherwise you'll drag yourself to an early grave, literally. Dylan's eyes illuminated in the light. Then he stepped away from his position, fluttering his wings in the process. His hands raised, making a wooden door appear, yet the seams around its edges seemed to glow as if hiding a blinding light on the other side. Dylan went to touch the door but paused and turned back to me. Listen, you've got a life to live. Don't waste it. Life is a precious thing, so get back up there and live it well. We'll meet again someday. Make sure that someday isn't someday soon, he rumbled, and with that he pulled the door open and disappeared on the other side. With his disappearance, as did the door and the light beyond it. I was left in silence, still reeling from the interaction and my hand no longer aching in pain. If anything, I'd noticed that nothing was hurting, and my arm felt right again. Since first waking up, all of my damaged limbs had felt disconnected, like false limbs had replaced my old ones. But now, I could feel my arm again, and I could feel my legs again. I returned to my room, removing the cast on my arm using the knife, already expecting the blade to fail and piercing my flesh, doing the same for my legs. In the end, my fiancée was horrified at what I'd done, but I was more relieved than ever. I'd gotten closure. I'd gotten an answer. And Dylan had left one. Parting gift. He'd taken the pain I'd received and given me more peace than I'd had since before my accident. However, I'd still been left with a sour taste in my mouth. By the morning of my 15th and final day in this hospital, I'd been left wondering what was waiting on the other side. After all, there was clearly no heaven or hell, and if there was nothing like that, then what was there on the other side? I guess it's a question I'll need to ask Dylan another time, because right now I plan to take my fiancée, plan out my wedding, and get a honeymoon prepared. Because I'm going to take Dylan's advice. I'm going to live my life properly, and whatever awaits me on the other side, I'm going to make sure I go there with a smile on my face and a bucket list checked off. So if you ever feel your visitor, don't be afraid. It just means your time hasn't come yet. So take their presence as a reminder. Life is precious, so you'd better start living it. Or they'll need to snuff it out early just because of how little there is for you to use. Don't take it as a threat or a warning. Take it as a reminder. Life might be fragile and limited, but it is precious and worth giving your all to experience.